She held a tray laden with crystal flutes. He held the power to shatter her world. When 22-year-old Clara Hayes started her shift at L'Étoile d'Or, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, she didn't expect to be accused of grand larceny, publicly fired, and threatened with a prison sentence. Her manager thought he was protecting the restaurant's pristine reputation from a nobody. He didn't realize he was performing for a man who could buy the entire city block on a whim, a man who valued integrity over pedigree. And when that quiet observer finally speaks, the silence that follows isn't just golden. It's devastating. You will not want to miss the look on the manager's face when he realizes who he's been insulting all night. The low hum of contented wealth was the house music of L'Étoile d'Or. It was a symphony of discreetly clinking silverware, murmured stock tips, and the almost silent glide of Italian leather shoes on polished marble. For Clara Hayes, it was the soundtrack of survival. It was 8:00 p.m. on a Saturday, the apex of the week, and Clara had been on her feet for 7 hours straight. The soles of her regulation black flats burned, a dull, insistent ache that radiated up her calves. Her smile, however, remained as crisp and starched as her apron. It was her armor. Clara was more than a waitress. She was an aspiring architect, currently navigating the financial labyrinth of night classes at Cooper Union. L'Étoile d'Or, with its exorbitant prices and generous, if often condescending, clientele, was her lifeline. It paid for her textbooks, her drafting supplies, and the rent on her tiny Brooklyn walk-up. She moved through the dining room with a practiced grace, her memory a steel trap for the intricate allergies, preferences, and petty vanities of New York's elite. She knew that Mrs. Vanderbilt took her Pellegrino with exactly 3 lime wedges, no more, no less, and that Mr. Abramoff, the tech mogul, despised the scent of truffle oil. Her overseer in this gilded cage was Martin Fletcher, the restaurant's general manager. Martin was a man sculpted from pretension and anxiety. He was tall and impossibly thin, with a severe haircut and a belief that his purpose on earth was to act as the fierce guardian of a 3 Michelin star gate. To Martin, a reservation at L'Étoile d'Or wasn't just a meal. It was a confirmation of one's place in the social stratosphere. He judged patrons not by their character, but by the vintage of their wine selection and the name on their black card. His gaze was a constant, unnerving presence, sweeping the room for any sign of imperfection, a crooked fork, a water glass less than half full, a waitress who looked anything less than adoringly servile. Clara's focus tonight, as it often was on table 12, tucked away in a quiet alcove. It was the domain of Mr. Croft. He was a fixture, appearing every Saturday at precisely 7:30 p.m., always alone. He was a man in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair, a face etched with thought rather than age, and eyes that missed nothing. He dressed in impeccably tailored but understated suits of charcoal and navy. He never made small talk. He simply read a book, ate his meal with quiet concentration, and left a tip that was exactly, mathematically, 30% of the bill. The other staff were terrified of him. They saw his silence as judgment. But Clara, the architecture student, saw something else. She saw the details. She noticed his cufflinks were not store-bought. They were miniature, perfectly rendered models of Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water. She saw that the pen he used to sign his check was a rare, custom-made carbon fiber instrument she'd once seen featured in a design magazine. She didn't see a critic. She saw a creator. She served him with quiet efficiency, anticipating his needs without intrusion, a silent dance of professionalism she had perfected just for him. He never said much, but occasionally he would look up as she refilled his water, and his eyes would hold a flicker of what she interpreted as professional respect. For Clara, that was worth more than any fawning compliment. Tonight, however, the delicate equilibrium of the restaurant was about to be shattered. The disturbance arrived in a whirlwind of Chanel No. 5 and entitlement. They were the Sinclairs, new money that screamed where old money whispered. The reservation was for 4. Richard Sinclair, a bulldog of a man whose real estate empire was built on ruthless acquisitions. His wife, Evelyn, a woman draped in diamonds that seemed to weigh down her skeletal frame. Their son, Tristan, a smirking 25-year-old with his father's arrogance and none of his drive, and his vapid girlfriend, Tiffany. Martin Fletcher descended upon them like a moth to a bonfire, his face contorted into a mask of rapturous welcome. "Mr. Sinclair, what an honor! Your table is ready, of course." They were seated in Clara's section. Her heart sank. She had served them once before, an experience that had ended with Evelyn complaining that the ice in her water was too cold, and Richard trying to poach the restaurant's sommelier for his own personal staff. "I'll have the Chateau Margaux, the 82, Richard boomed, not even looking at the wine list. "And don't let some child serve it." He gestured dismissively at Clara. Martin shot Clara a look that could curdle cream. "Of course, Mr. Sinclair. Our head sommelier will attend to you personally." He then leaned in toward Clara, his voice a venomous whisper. "Do not mess this up, Hayes. The Sinclairs are considering investing in our new Miami expansion. They are royalty tonight. You are the help. Understand?" "Yes, Martin," Clara said, her smile feeling brittle. The meal was an ordeal. Tristan sent his steak back twice, claiming it was psychologically undercooked. Evelyn discovered a microscopic speck of cork on her wine glass and demanded a full forensic analysis. Tiffany spent the entire time taking selfies, her flash periodically strafing the dining room. Through it all, Clara maintained her composure, her movements fluid and calm, a small island of professionalism in a sea of chaos. From his alcove, Mr. Croft occasionally glanced over, his brow furrowed slightly, before returning to his book. He was on his dessert course, a simple pear tart, when the night took a turn from difficult to disastrous. Evelyn Sinclair let out a shriek that made heads turn across the room. "My bracelet! It's gone!" She held up her wrist, which was now conspicuously bare. The bracelet in question was a monstrosity of platinum and diamonds, a piece so ostentatious it had been the subject of Tiffany's last 10 selfies. "It was right here," Evelyn wailed, pointing at the table. "I took it off for a moment because the clasp was pinching me." Panic erupted at the table. Richard Sinclair stood up, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "Nobody leaves this table. I want this place searched." Martin Fletcher materialized instantly, his face pale with terror. "Mrs. Sinclair, please calm yourself. I'm sure it's just been misplaced." "Misplaced? That was a $200,000 custom piece from Graf," she screeched. "It hasn't been misplaced. It's been stolen." Her eyes, small and hard like a bird's, swiveled and landed on Clara, who was standing by the service station, holding a tray of clean napkins. "It was her," Evelyn declared, her voice ringing with the absolute certainty of the unjustly accused. The waitress. She was hovering all night. She must have swiped it when she cleared the bread plates. The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. The entire dining room had gone silent. Every eye was on Clara. She felt the blood drain from her face, a cold dread washing over her. "Ma'am, I wouldn't," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't even see you take it off." "Liar!" Tristan sneered, getting to his feet. "I saw you looking at it. Probably worth more than your entire life, isn't it?" Martin Fletcher turned on Clara, his earlier fear replaced by a desperate need for a scapegoat. The Sinclair investment was slipping through his fingers, and he was going to pin it on the most disposable person in the room. "Clara," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Where is it? Give it back now, and we can handle this quietly." "Martin, I swear I don't have it," Clara pleaded, her eyes welling with tears of shock and humiliation. "I've worked here for 2 years. You know me." "I know you're a student living in some hovel in Brooklyn," Martin snapped, his voice rising. "This is a temptation I'm sure you couldn't resist. Empty your pockets. Now." The command was a physical blow. To be treated like a common criminal in front of a room full of people she had served, whose secrets she had kept, whose comfort she had ensured. Her hands trembled as she pulled the linings of her apron pockets inside out. A wine key, a pen, a small notepad, and a few crumpled dollar bills fell onto the floor. "See? Nothing," she whispered, her voice cracking. Richard Sinclair scoffed. "She probably has it hidden in her locker, or she passed it off to one of the bus boys. I'm calling the police." He pulled out his phone. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Sinclair," Martin said, his face a mask of grim authority. He was in full damage control mode, performing for his audience of one, the man with the checkbook. He turned to Clara, his eyes cold and devoid of any human sympathy. "Clara Hayes, your employment at L'Etoile d'Or is terminated, effective immediately. You are a thief and a disgrace. Security will escort you to your locker. You will be searched, and then you will be handed over to the NYPD." He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her bicep. The humiliation was absolute. She was being condemned without trial, her reputation and future destroyed over a lie. The room was a blur of faces, some pitying, some scornful, most just morbidly fascinated by the drama. She felt a single tear escape and trace a hot path down her cheek. And then a voice cut through the charged silence. It wasn't loud, but it had the resonant authority of a judge's gavel. "That will be quite enough." Every head turned. Mr. Croft was on his feet, dabbing his lips with his napkin, as if he were merely commenting on the quality of the tart. He placed the napkin deliberately on the table and walked from the shadows of his alcove into the center of the room. He didn't look at the Sinclairs. He didn't look at Clara. He looked directly at Martin Fletcher, his gaze as sharp and analytical as a surgeon's scalpel. Martin released Clara's arm as if it were red hot. "Mr. Croft, I do apologize for this disruption. We are just handling a private staff matter." "It ceased to be a private matter when you began your public inquisition," Croft said calmly. His eyes finally flickered to Clara, taking in her tear-streaked face and trembling hands. Then they moved to the Sinclairs, and for the first time, Clara saw a glint of something other than quiet observation in his expression. It was contempt. "A $200,000 bracelet," Croft mused, his voice carrying easily through the silent room. "A serious accusation. You are quite certain it was stolen, Mrs. Sinclair?" "Of course, I'm certain," Evelyn snapped, clearly unaccustomed to being questioned by anyone. "It was right here, and now it's gone. That girl," she jabbed a finger at Clara, "is the only one who came near the table." Croft nodded slowly. He walked toward the Sinclair's table, his movements measured and deliberate. The patrons watched, mesmerized. This was better than Broadway. "You say you took it off because the clasp was pinching?" he said, his eyes scanning the table. "An understandable complaint for a piece of that magnitude. Heavy as the wrist that wears the crown, so to speak." He gestured to Tiffany, who was still holding her phone. "Young lady, you were documenting your evening with some enthusiasm. May I see the last photograph you took?" Tiffany, flustered by the sudden attention from the imposing stranger, fumbled with her phone and showed him the screen. It was a picture of her and Evelyn, their heads close together, Evelyn's garish bracelet in sharp focus on her wrist. "Excellent," Croft said. He then pointed to the timestamp on the photo. "Taken at 9:12 p.m. It is now 9:25, and in this photo, the clasp of the bracelet," he zoomed in with a deft pinch of his fingers, "is clearly visible. It is a box clasp with a secondary safety latch, a very secure design, not one that would pinch unless it were improperly fastened, or perhaps already broken." Evelyn Sinclair's face paled slightly. I don't know anything about clasps. It was pinching." "I'm sure it was," Croft said, his tone dry. He then turned his attention to Tristan, who was looking increasingly nervous. "You, sir. You were particularly adamant about the waitress's guilt. You claimed you saw her looking at the piece of jewelry. A rather vague observation. But you were also, if I'm not mistaken, the one who handled the dessert plates just now." Tristan puffed out his chest. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying. I'm observing," Croft corrected him. "You reached across the table to sample your girlfriend's chocolate lava cake. A rather boorish move, but telling. In doing so, your sleeve," he pointed, "brushed against your mother's champagne flute. A tiny gesture. Insignificant, really, except you left a small smudge of chocolate on the stem. All eyes went to the champagne flute. There it was, a tiny brown smear. And now," Croft said, his voice dropping slightly as he built to his conclusion, "let us consider the physics of the situation. A heavy, improperly latched bracelet, a wrist in motion, a nearby open-topped vessel." He leaned over the table, his eyes fixed on the ornate silver ice bucket, chilling a second bottle of champagne. With 2 fingers, he reached inside, his hand plunging into the icy water. When he withdrew his hand, something was dangling from his index finger, dripping and sparkling under the recessed lighting, the diamond bracelet. A collective gasp swept the room. Evelyn Sinclair looked as though she'd seen a ghost. Croft held it up. "As I suspected. It didn't vanish. It fell. Dropped into the ice bucket when your mother gestured dramatically, and no one noticed because you were all too busy complaining about the temperature of your steak." He didn't hand the bracelet back. Instead, he placed it on the white tablecloth, where it lay like a dead, glittering snake. He then turned his full, unadulterated scorn on Richard Sinclair. "You were ready to ruin a young woman's life," Croft said, his quiet voice now laced with ice. "To call the police, to have her arrested, to brand her a thief for the rest of her days, all to cover for your own carelessness and your family's appalling lack of decorum. You didn't lose a bracelet. You lost your honor, assuming you had any to begin with." Richard Sinclair sputtered, his face a mottled mess of red and white. "Now see here, who the hell do you think you are?" Martin Fletcher, seeing his Miami investment turning to dust, decided to reassert his authority. "Sir, I must ask you to return to your table. You have made your point. This is still my restaurant." Croft turned to face Martin, and the mild contempt he'd shown the Sinclairs was nothing compared to the Arctic blast he unleashed on the manager. "Your restaurant? You are a temporary custodian of a space, Mr. Fletcher. A space you have just poisoned with your sycophancy and your cruelty. You didn't seek the truth. You sought a sacrifice. You were willing to destroy one of your own staff, your most competent and observant staff member, I might add, to appease these buffoons." He took a step closer, and Martin involuntarily took a step back. "I have been dining here every Saturday for 3 years. I have watched this young woman work. I have seen her handle the most difficult patrons with a grace you couldn't comprehend. I have seen her correct a sommelier on a vintage, quietly, so as not to embarrass him. I have seen her notice a loose floor tile and report it before an elderly patron could trip. She is an asset. You, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, are a liability. Now you listen to me, Martin hissed, his career flashing before his eyes. I don't care who you are, you're just a customer. In this establishment, my word is final, and I say she is fired. A thin, cold smile touched Julian Croft's lips. It did not reach his eyes. A fascinating management philosophy. Allow me to offer a counterpoint. He reached into his jacket and produced a slim, elegant wallet. From it, he extracted not a credit card, but a simple, heavy-stock business card. He flicked it onto the table in front of Martin. Martin Fletcher glanced down at it. His eyes widened. He blinked, read it again, and the color drained from his face so completely he looked like a marble statue. The blood that had left his face seemed to pool in his feet, rooting him to the spot. The card was stark white, with a single embossed logo of a stylized compass rose. Beneath it were 3 words: Julian Croft Founder, Croft & Partners Architecture. The name hung in the air, resonating with the force of a tectonic shift. There wasn't a person of wealth or influence in New York who didn't know that name. Julian Croft wasn't just an architect, he was the architect. A living legend, a Pritzker Prize winner, a man so reclusive and sought after that he was more myth than reality. He designed private islands, corporate headquarters that looked like sculptures, and museums that were themselves works of art. He was also, as it happened, the lead designer and a majority stakeholder in the international hospitality group that owned L'Étoile d'Or and its parent company. He wasn't just a customer. He was, for all intents and purposes, the owner. The silence that followed was profound. It was the sound of a world reordering itself. The Sinclairs looked like they had been turned to stone. Richard's jaw was slack, his bravado utterly evaporated. Evelyn was frantically trying to shove the recovered bracelet into her purse, as if hiding the evidence could undo the past 10 minutes. Clara stared, her mind struggling to connect the quiet, bookish Mr. Croft from Table 12 with the titan of architecture whose work she studied, revered, and tried to emulate in her own amateur sketches. The man whose monograph on urban spatial theory was currently sitting on her nightstand. It was impossible. And yet it was true. Martin Fletcher's throat worked, but no sound came out. He looked from the card to Croft's unyielding face, his entire universe collapsing in on itself. Mr. Croft, he finally managed to whisper, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. I had no idea. I am so deeply sorry. You are sorry you got caught, Croft corrected him, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Your apology is as hollow as your character. He turned his back on Martin and faced Clara. Her face was still stained with tears, but her expression was one of pure, unadulterated shock. Miss Hayes, he said, his tone softening almost imperceptibly. I believe this man owes you an apology. And your job back. Clara found her voice, though it was shaky. Thank you, Mr. Croft, but I don't think I can work for him. I can't work here anymore. The words came out before she had even consciously thought them. The spell of L'Étoile d'Or, the glamour, the necessity of it, was broken. It wasn't a gateway to her future. It was a cage. Croft nodded slowly, a flicker of approval in his eyes. A wise decision. One should never remain in a structure with a faulty foundation. He then turned his gaze back to the petrified manager. Mr. Fletcher, you are correct about one thing. Someone is leaving this restaurant tonight. It just isn't her. He pulled out his phone, dialed a single number, and put it on speaker. "Henri," he said, his voice crisp. "It's Julian." A frantic, French-accented voice replied instantly. "Julian, is everything all right? I was told there was a disturbance." It was Henri Dubois, the CEO of the entire hospitality group. "There was a disturbance, Henri. It's being handled," Croft said. "I am at l'Étoile d'Or. I want you to call security and have our general manager, Martin Fletcher, escorted from the premises. His access codes are to be revoked immediately. Have his termination papers drawn up for cause, gross misconduct and endangerment of the company's reputation. I will expect them on my desk in the morning. Consider it done, Julian." "My God, what happened?" "He chose the wrong side," Croft said simply, and disconnected the call. Martin Fletcher swayed on his feet, his face a mask of utter devastation. "Please, Mr. Croft," he begged, his voice cracking. "I have a mortgage. I've been here for 15 years. "And in 15 years, you have learned nothing of grace, loyalty, or simple human decency," Croft replied, unmoved. "You may have managed this floor, but you have never understood the heart of hospitality. You are dismissed." Two burly security guards, who usually stood discreetly by the entrance, appeared at Martin's elbows. They took him by the arms, the same way he had grabbed Clara just moments before. As they led him away, his face crumpled, and he began to sob. Not tears of remorse, but the ugly, gasping sobs of a man stripped of his petty kingdom. With Martin gone, Croft's laser-like attention turned back to the Sinclairs, who were trying to shrink into their chairs. "As for you," he said, his voice dripping with disdain, "you came here seeking a meal. Instead, you have served up a vulgar spectacle of your own making. Your bill will be taken care of. I suggest you leave now, before I am tempted to call my contacts at the New York Times and give them an exclusive on the Sinclair family's penchant for false accusations and public hysterics." Richard Sinclair, a man used to bulldozing his way through every obstacle, looked truly afraid. He threw a few $100 bills on the table, a pathetic gesture of appeasement, and herded his stunned family toward the exit without a backward glance. They scurried out of the restaurant like rats fleeing a sinking ship, the jeers and whispers of the other diners following them out the door. The room, which had been frozen in silence, slowly began to buzz. The tension broke, replaced by a murmur of excited chatter. Clara stood in the middle of it all, feeling like she was in the eye of a storm. Her shift had started with aching feet and ended with the public dismantling of 3 people's lives. Mr. Croft walked over to her. Up close, she could see the intricate lines around his eyes, the immense intelligence that burned within them. "Are you all right, Miss Hayes?" he asked. I think so," she said, still dazed. "Thank you. I don't know how to thank you. You can start by calling me Julian," he said. "And you have nothing to thank me for. I did not act out of charity. I acted out of an intolerance for incompetence and injustice. You displayed immense poise under pressure. He displayed a catastrophic lack of judgment. It was a simple architectural principle. The unsound structure had to be removed." He paused, studying her face. "You said you couldn't work here anymore. What will you do?" The reality of her situation crashed down on her. She was unemployed. Her rent was due next week. Her tuition payment was in a month. The relief she felt was suddenly tinged with a new, more practical fear. "I'll find another job," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Another restaurant, probably." Julian Croft's expression was unreadable. He seemed to be weighing something in his mind. Serving overpriced food to people like the Sinclairs is a waste of your talents, Miss Hayes." "What talents?" she asked, with a short, bitter laugh. "Knowing how to carry 4 plates at once?" "No," he said, his gaze sharp. "The talent of observation. I've watched you. You see things others don't. The way the light hits the west wall in the afternoon, the slight tremor in an elderly man's hand as he reaches for his glass. You notice the details? That is the fundamental gift of an architect." Clara stared at him, speechless. He had seen her. All this time, behind his book and his silent meals, he had truly seen her. "Your name," he said. "Clara Hayes. Are you by any chance the same C. Hayes who won the student design competition at Cooper Union last semester for a proposed low-income housing module?" Clara felt her heart stop. The world tilted on its axis. That competition was a small, internal university affair. The prize was $500 and a line on her resume. She had never imagined anyone outside the school's architecture department would have ever heard of it. How did you know that?" she whispered. "I am on the board of trustees for the university," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "I review the finalists for the annual prize. Your design was promising. It showed a sophisticated understanding of material stress and human-centric flow. It was raw, but the foundation was sound." He reached into his pocket again, and the great oak doors of L'Étoile d'Or swung shut behind him, the soft thud echoing in the cavernous silence that remained. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, no one moved. The air, once thick with accusation and humiliation, was now thin, crystalline, and vibrating with the aftershock of Julian Croft's departure. Clara stood in the center of the room, a lone figure in a sea of frozen tableaus. The business card in her hand felt impossibly heavy, a small rectangle of paper that had somehow recalibrated the gravity of her entire universe. The spell broke not with a crash, but with a collective, rustling exhalation from the remaining diners. It was followed by a low, furious murmur, the sound of gossip being forged in real time. Eyes that had moments ago been fixed on her with pity or scorn were now wide with a different kind of intensity. Awe. She was no longer the disgraced waitress. She was the protagonist, the woman who had been anointed by the mythic Julian Croft. A busboy, a young man named Leo, she'd often shared hurried cigarettes with during their breaks, approached her cautiously, as if she might suddenly evaporate. "Clara, are you okay?" She looked down at the card again, tracing the embossed compass rose with a trembling finger. Julian Croft, founder, Croft and Partners Architecture. The name she had only ever read in textbooks, whispered with reverence in her Cooper Union classrooms. He had been sitting in her section for 3 years. The thought was so staggering, so cosmically absurd, that a laugh bubbled up in her throat, a hysterical, half-strangled sound. "I think so," she managed to say, the words feeling foreign in her own mouth. "I think I'm going to be okay." She turned and walked, her movements feeling strangely detached, as if she were piloting a body she no longer fully owned. She passed the now empty Sinclair table, a wasteland of half-eaten desserts and discarded napkins. The diamond bracelet still lay on the tablecloth, a glittering indictment, looking cheap and vulgar in the aftermath. She didn't give it a second glance. Her path led her through the swinging doors to the kitchen, into the controlled chaos of the back of house. Here, the news had already spread like wildfire. The entire kitchen staff, chefs in their sweat-stained whites, dishwashers with steam rising from their aprons, stopped what they were doing and stared at her. The head chef, a notoriously temperamental Frenchman who had once thrown a saucepan at a sous chef for over-salting a consommé, stepped forward. He wiped his hands on his apron, his expression uncharacteristically solemn. "Hayes," he said, his voice a low rumble. "What you did, standing up to that pig Fletcher. It took courage." He paused. "The staff, we have taken a collection. For your trouble." He gestured to an envelope on the steel prep table, thick with cash. Clara looked at the envelope, then at the faces around her. She saw solidarity, respect, and a shared understanding of what it meant to be at the mercy of men like Martin Fletcher and Richard Sinclair. But accepting the money felt wrong. It felt like accepting payment for her own public execution, a severance package for her dignity. "Thank you, Jean-Pierre," she said, her voice finally steady. "But I can't take that. Buy everyone a round of drinks after the shift. On me." She continued to the staff locker room, the narrow, windowless space that had always felt like a cramped cell. She changed out of her uniform, the starched white shirt, the black apron, the sensible shoes that had been instruments of torture for 2 years. As she folded the apron for the last time, she felt a profound sense of finality. She wasn't just leaving a job. She was shedding a skin, an identity that had been defined by servitude and invisibility. She was no longer Clara the waitress. The question, terrifying and exhilarating, was who she would become next. Walking out of the restaurant's service entrance into the cool night air of Manhattan was a rebirth. The city smelled different, not of truffle oil and floor polish, but of rain-washed asphalt, exhaust fumes, and possibility. The familiar skyline, a view she usually saw through the smudged window of a late-night bus, now looked like a personal invitation. It was a forest of steel and glass, and for the first time, she felt she might have a place within it, not just as someone who served its inhabitants, but as someone who could shape it. The weekend was a purgatory of anxious waiting. Clara oscillated between dizzying hope and crushing self-doubt. She would hold Julian's card, the heavy stock cool against her palm, and feel a surge of confidence. This was real. This was happening. Then she would look at her own portfolio, a collection of student projects, ambitious but unrefined, and a cold dread would wash over her. She was a waitress from Brooklyn who went to night school. The other apprentices at a firm like Croft & Partners would be the polished scions of Ivy League architecture programs. They would speak a language of theory and precedent she had only just begun to learn. Julian Croft had seen something in her. But what if he was wrong? What if, under the bright, unforgiving lights of his world, she was exposed as an imposter? On Sunday night, the story broke. A society blogger who had been dining at L'Étoile d'Or that night published a breathless, detailed account of the entire affair. It was a masterpiece of schadenfreude, complete with thinly veiled descriptions of the real estate barbarian and his diamond-draped harpy of a wife. The piece went viral. By Monday morning, the Sinclairs were not just disgraced. They were a meme, a citywide punchline. Their name, which they had spent a fortune building into a brand of ruthless success, was now synonymous with vulgarity and stupidity. Richard Sinclair's carefully constructed empire, built on intimidation and perceived power, began to show cracks. Lenders grew nervous. Competitors smelled blood. The foundation, built on the unstable ground of public image, had been fatally compromised by one night of appalling behavior. Martin Fletcher's downfall was less public, but more absolute. Blacklisted by Henri Dubois' global hospitality group, his name became poison in the rarefied world of fine dining. No one would touch him. The man who had judged others by their pedigree found he had no pedigree of his own, only a reputation for cruelty and catastrophic misjudgment. The last Clara heard, he had lost his apartment and was managing a tourist trap restaurant in Times Square, a personal hell of sticky menus and endlessly refilled sodas, forced to smile at the very people he had once so profoundly despised. Clara read about it all with a strange sense of detachment. Their fates were echoes of a life she had already left behind. Her focus was singular, terrifying, and immediate. Monday morning. She stood before the Croft and Partners building, a blade of obsidian and chrome that sliced the midtown sky. It was less a building and more a statement of intent, severe, elegant, and seemingly impossible. Its lobby was a cathedral of minimalist silence, a vast expanse of polished concrete, black leather, and glass. There was no gold leaf, no plush velvet, no cloying scent of flowers. The air smelled of clean ozone and expensive paper. It was a space designed for thought, not for comfort. Julian's assistant, Maria, sat behind a monolithic desk of what looked like a single piece of carved granite. She was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled into a severe chignon, and eyes that seemed to perform a full structural analysis on Clara as she approached. "Clara Hayes," Clara said, her voice sounding small in the immense space. "I know who you are," Maria replied, her tone neither warm nor cold, but simply factual. "He is waiting. 40th floor." The elevator ascended in unnerving silence, a glass box climbing the building's spine, the city unfolding below. Julian Croft's office was not an office, it was a vista. 3 of the 4 walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a god's-eye view of Manhattan. The 4th was a library, crammed with thousands of books. The only furniture was a massive drafting table, a few starkly beautiful chairs, and Julian Croft himself, standing by the window, silhouetted against the sky. "Miss Hayes," he said, turning. "Punctuality is the foundation of respect. You have laid a good first stone." "Mr. Croft, Julian," she corrected herself, her throat dry. "I don't know how to thank you for what you did." "Let us be precise," he said, walking toward the drafting table. "I did not do anything for you. I intervened to correct a flaw in a system I own. Martin Fletcher was a weak joint. The Sinclairs were an excessive, unbalanced load. The structure was failing. You were simply the element bearing the most undue stress. My actions were a matter of professional integrity, not personal charity. Do you understand the distinction?" Yes, I think so." "Good," he said. "Because charity will not help you here." He gestured to the chair opposite his table. "Sit." She sat. He remained standing, looking down at her, his gaze analytical, intense. "I have reviewed your file from Cooper Union. Your grades are adequate. Your submitted designs show a spark of spatial intelligence, but they are derivative and emotionally overwrought. You lack the technical vocabulary and the theoretical rigor of your peers, who will be joining you from schools that cost more per semester than you likely earn in a year." Every word was a small, sharp blow, dismantling any fragile confidence she had managed to build. "So why am I here?" she asked, the question coming out as a whisper. "Because for 3 years I have watched you work," he said, his voice lowering slightly. "I watched you manage the most complex system imaginable, a room full of egos, appetites, and insecurities. You are not just observant. You anticipate. You see how one element, a misplaced fork, a raised voice, a spilled glass of water, can compromise the integrity of the entire evening. You understand flow, you manage stress points, and you do it with an economy of motion and a grace under pressure that cannot be taught. That, Miss Hayes, is architecture. The rest is merely mathematics and drafting, skills any competent technician can learn. He leaned forward, placing his palms flat on the table. The offer I made you was not a reward. It is a crucible. You will be placed in what my junior staff affectionately call the pit. You will be given the most menial, soul-crushing tasks. You will fetch coffee. You will archive blueprints until your fingers are stained with ink. You will build scale models that your superiors will tear apart with a single critical glance. Your peers will resent you for the way you arrived here. They will test you. They will try to break you. I will not intervene. If the foundation is truly sound, you will endure. If it is not, you will crumble. If you crumble, you will be discarded. The pay is insulting. The hours are inhuman. There is no guarantee of success. Is that understood? It was the most terrifying and the most honest job description she had ever heard. It was an invitation to a specific kind of hell, but it was also the first time in her life anyone had looked at her and seen not what she was, but what she could be. He wasn't offering her a handout. He was offering her an anvil and a hammer and the chance to forge herself into something new. A profound calm settled over her. The fear was still there, but it was now a foundation, not a flood. "It's understood, Julian," she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "When do I start?" A flicker of something, approval, perhaps even a smile, touched the corner of his mouth. "You've already started," he said. "Maria will show you to your desk." The first 6 months were a blur of exhaustion and relentless pressure, precisely as he had promised. The pit was a brightly lit, open-plan studio filled with 20 other young, hungry architects in training. They were brilliant, arrogant, and merciless. They saw her as a curiosity, the waitress Julian had plucked from obscurity. They tested her with inside jokes, condescending questions about her night school education, and a steady stream of the worst grunt work. Clara responded with the only tool she had, her work ethic. She applied the same relentless focus she had used to survive 8-hour shifts on her feet. She was the first to arrive, the last to leave. When asked to archive old plans, she didn't just file them, she studied them, absorbing 3 decades of the firm's history, its design language, its evolution. When asked to build a model, she made her cuts cleaner, her joints more precise than anyone else's. She listened during critiques, saying little but absorbing everything. She spent her nights in the firm's library, devouring books, desperately trying to build the theoretical framework she lacked. Julian remained a distant, formidable presence. He would sweep through the studio, his silence more intimidating than any shout. He never spoke to her, but his tests continued. One morning, she found a book on Japanese joinery on her desk. Another time, a rare monograph on the concrete work of Tadao Ando. There were never any notes. They were provocations, signposts on a path he expected her to navigate herself. Her breakthrough arrived not in a flash of inspiration, but in a moment of quiet observation. A senior team, led by a notoriously difficult partner named Peterson, was in the final stages of a design for a new concert hall in Copenhagen. The centerpiece was a breathtaking, acoustically perfect timber roof that flowed like a wave. But the physical model kept failing. A crucial joint where the massive curved beams met the main support column kept showing unsustainable stress fractures. They had run dozens of simulations, rebuilt the model 4 times, and were on the verge of scrapping the entire concept. Clara was tasked with cleaning up the debris from the latest failed model. As she gathered the splintered pieces of balsa wood, she saw it. The team was treating the joint as a single point of failure, trying to reinforce it with more and more mass. But she saw it differently. She saw a tray laden with crystal flutes, stacked too high. You didn't reinforce the tray, you redistributed the weight. Her heart hammering in her chest, she took a piece of scrap paper and sketched a new design for the joint. Instead of a single, brutal connection, she envisioned a series of smaller, interlocking tenons, a fanned-out design that would distribute the immense load across a wider surface area, like the root system of an ancient tree. It was a principle from the Japanese joinery book Julian had left for her. She walked over to Peterson, the crumpled sketch in her hand. He was staring at the broken model, his face a mask of fury. "Mr. Peterson," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "What is it, Hayes? Can't you see I'm busy?" he snapped without looking at her. "It's the joint," she said, pushing forward. "We're thinking about the load incorrectly. We're trying to stop the force. We should be guiding it." She held out the sketch. He snatched it from her hand, ready to dismiss it. He glanced down. He stopped. His eyes narrowed, tracing the lines she had drawn. He looked from the sketch to the broken model, then back to the sketch. The anger on his face slowly dissolved, replaced by a dawning, grudging understanding. He didn't say a word to her. He simply turned to his team. "Rebuild it," he commanded, holding up her sketch. "Like this." A week later, Maria informed Clara that her desk was being moved from the pit to Peterson's designs team. No one congratulated her. No one had to. In the silent, brutal meritocracy of Croft and Partners, she had survived. She had earned her place. A year to the day after she had walked out of L'Etoile d'Or, she stood beside Julian Croft on a windswept cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean in Big Sur. They were on the site of his next project, a private home, but one that sought to redefine the very concept of domestic space. "The client wants a view from every room," Julian said, his voice almost carried away by the wind. "An amateur would build a glass box. It would be an insult to the landscape, a cage for looking out of." Clara stared at the rugged coastline, the way the waves crashed against the rocks, the ancient cypress trees bent and shaped by the ceaseless wind. She thought of the stuffy, claustrophobic dining room of the restaurant. Another kind of cage. She thought of her tiny Brooklyn apartment, with its single window looking out onto a brick wall. "A building shouldn't just look at the landscape," she said, thinking aloud, the words coming to her as if carried on the wind. It should be in a conversation with it. It shouldn't be a box. It should be a series of paths, a journey. The walls shouldn't block the wind. They should channel it, so you can hear the sound of the ocean in the heart of the house. The roof shouldn't be a lid. It should be a frame for the sky. She turned to him, her eyes bright with the force of the idea. "The foundation shouldn't just be on the cliff," she said, her voice gaining strength. "It should be off it. We use the stone from the site itself. We don't build on the land. We ask the land to rise up and meet us." Julian was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on her, his expression unreadable. The wind whipped his silver hair around his face. She wondered if she had spoken out of turn, if her idea was naive, the rambling of a student. Then he gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was more than approval. It was recognition. "A structure with integrity," he said softly. "One that understands its purpose and its place. The foundation is sound." He turned his gaze from her to the vast, open horizon. "Draw it up, Clara. Let's show them how it's done." Standing there, on the edge of the continent, with the salt spray on her face and a notebook in her hand, Clara finally understood. The quiet man from Table 12 had not just given her a job. He had given her a language. He had seen the architect she was long before she knew how to build. The journey had been grueling, the path uncertain, but she was no longer a waitress dreaming of another life. She was here, a creator, a shaper of space, with nothing before her but the sky, the sea, and the thrilling, terrifying responsibility of a blank page. Her life was finally, truly, her own design.